Gabrielle Chanel Fashion Manifesto has been one of the most anticipated fashion exhibitions of this year. I've just come back from London, from the Victoria and Albert Museum, where I visited the exhibition, and in this video I'm going to share if it's really worth visiting. Spoiler alert, it didn't disappoint, but let's dive into the details. Now, what can you actually see at the exhibition? The V&A exhibits around 200 garments from their own archives, but also from collections from around the world. And what is very special is that they included garments from the very early era of Gabrielle Chanel. This is special because these designs are very rare, and they are also rarely exhibited due to their age. In general, the exhibition follows a chronological approach, but there are certain focus areas. For example, there is an entire room dedicated to the infamous Chanel suits. But there are also other rooms dedicated to her jewelry, for example, or other accessories such as the 255 bag, for example, or the two-tone shoes. I would say that the person, Gabrielle Chanel, is rather in the background. The pieces of information that the visitor gets during the exhibition rather serve as support to understand her development as a business owner, her development as a designer, and also the development of her design language. You may have heard about, or you may have even visited the exhibition Manifeste de Mode, which was opened in Paris in October 2020 and then also traveled on to Australia and Japan. And now you may think, okay, is there any difference if I now go to the UK as well to see this exhibition? So first of all, Manifeste de Mode focused on two major time periods. The first one was when Gabrielle Chanel started out as a designer and how she developed her fashion business until the Second World War. And the second period is when she reopened her store in the 1950s. The current exhibition, Fashion Manifesto, builds on the partnership with the Palais Galleria. They also took over this timeline. Nevertheless, I would not say that this current exhibition is a mere copy of the one in Paris. The V&A closely collaborated with the Palais Galleria and also the Patrimoine de Chanel for this exhibition. They also have many garments from them on loan. Nevertheless, they also included, as I said before, garments from their own archives. The V&A has a very vast textile and garment collection themselves. And they also included garments from collections from around the world. And in general, the V&A not only focuses in their collections on textiles and garments, they have very big other collections, so they could basically use objects from these other collections. For example, there are objects from theater and cinema. There are also many illustrations included. And naturally, because of their geographic location, the V&A also puts a strong focus on Gabrielle Chanel's relationship to Britain. As you may know, Gabrielle Chanel had close relationships to many members of the high society in Britain. She was very close friends with Winston Churchill. She had a very close relationship with the Duke of Westminster. And these relationships allowed her not only to tap into a new market, into a foreign market, but also to find new suppliers. And this is also where she discovered her passion for textiles, especially tweed. In many ways, this exhibition and also the build-up to the opening of this exhibition reminded me of Karl Lagerfeld, A Line of Beauty, the exhibition this year at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Because similar to Lagerfeld, Gabrielle Chanel is one of the most polarizing personalities in fashion. And similar to their colleagues in New York, the British curators did not focus on the public persona of Gabrielle Chanel herself. They focused on the development of her business and also her design language and put everything into the greater historical context and what it means in terms of societal change. As I mentioned before, the exhibition starts with the early days of Gabrielle Chanel as a designer when she opened her millinery shop, and it is very interesting to see that Gabrielle Chanel didn't start with a big collection of garments as we may think today. She focused on one key product, and this was hats. And hats in the historical context made sense because hats were a key accessory at the time. Every woman wore a hat, and even those people who could not afford expensive clothing, they invested in one hat because it was basically a societal norm to wear a hat. The first exhibit that the visitor gets to see is a blouse from 1916, and this blouse is very simple. You may actually walk by if it was not in the center of the room, but what is very special is not only the age but also the material. Gabrielle Chanel used used jersey for it, and jersey previously was only used for sportswear or undergarments. It was definitely not used for women's wear, and Gabrielle Chanel took this humble material and turned it into something elegant and chic, and this is already showing her overall attitude towards fashion. She wanted to make fashion easier for women so that they can move around easier and more freely. The exhibition then moves on and focuses on the development of her hat designs, and what is interesting here is that we can already see her overall approach to fashion also later on. Hats at the time were very complicated. They had a lot of small decoration on them, like flowers, for example. They were really big, very flamboyant, and her hats were everything but what I just said. She still kept some conventions, but her hats were very much reduced. They had less decor, also different colors, and there was also a special way to wear them. And this was already her first step into this freeing the woman and also making things easier to wear. By the 1920s and 1930s, Gabrielle Chanel had established herself as a fashion designer, and also she arrived at her typical color palette, the black and also these beige tones. Nevertheless, she also used a deep red, for example, or an intense blue, but in general she didn't want to distract from the simplicity of her garments. I personally found it really interesting to see in those early days these two sides of Gabrielle Chanel as a designer. On the one hand, we have these clear and simple cuts with her suits. The waist is very low, but we can see how the suit will develop over time. On the other hand, there are also very simple muslin dresses, for example, with floral prints. They had 3D elements, 3D flowers on them, for example. They were very pretty, very colorful, and I think they would even be considered elegant today. This part about the very early days of Chanel as a fashion designer is probably the one that I enjoyed most during the exhibition. Of course, it is very special to see these early designs in real life, to see the craftsmanship, and also to see that she was a visionary, how innovative she was, because these garments look very modern even today, but back then this was nothing that women actually wore. So this was a very interesting part of the exhibition that I enjoyed. I also enjoyed to see how she started out with the business and how it developed from this millinery shop with one product throughout the course of her career to this what we later call the total look, that she actually offered not only a garment but also the matching accessories and jewelry and shoes to create this Chanel total look. The exhibition then moves on from these early days to her stage and movie productions, because she supplied costumes, for example, for Le Train Bleu. And then also the visitor can learn more about her involvement in Britain with textile manufacturers. You can also learn more about the little black dress, and there's an entire room dedicated to her fragrances, which always has been a big part of the Chanel business. The next room was a very big room and rather dark room with a lot of different garments, and you can see the intricacy of her designs. There is a lot of lace, embroidery, all of this is very grand, and there are also some designs which may not be considered okay by today's standards, but they are now historical artifacts. There were the so-called marabou coats with marabou feathers, and they are really, really big. And for me, it was actually a surprise to see them in real life, because when you see them up close, you can hardly imagine that this was designed by somebody like Gabrielle Chanel, who is today famous for her simplicity. And after this, we arrive at kind of a break or a rupture, because we have arrived at World War II when the House of Chanel was closed. And I personally was very curious how this exhibition was going to address this controversial time of Gabrielle Chanel. Similar to New York, this exhibition does not focus on the public persona or the person Gabrielle Chanel herself. Nevertheless, the curators took up the topic and discussed it. They show that on the one hand, there's evidence that she may have collaborated with the Germans, and they also present new findings that she may have been involved with the French resistance. There is a so-called attestation that Gabrielle Chanel was an agent occasionnel, which means an occasional agent for the French resistance, and she's also mentioned in one of the lists as an occasional agent. I personally appreciated that the curators discussed this topic, even though the biography of Gabrielle Chanel was not the big focus, but still this is a controversial part of her history, so they took this topic up. Additionally, I think it just makes this whole personal history of Gabrielle Chanel a bit more confusing because we now know that she may have been on both sides. If you're interested in the topic of Gabrielle Chanel and her involvement in the Second World War, I'm currently working on another video, so let me know in the comments below if you want to see this. And then we move on into probably the most photographed room of this exhibition. You have probably seen it on social media or in the newspapers. It's the room about the iconic Chanel suits. You have 2 rows of suits there. I would also call it the rainbow room because it was so colorful. And yes, it is a no-brainer to have the suits because on the one hand, even today we associate Gabrielle Chanel with the tweed suit. And it was in terms of fashion history or women's history overall, it is quite an important and iconic garment because it was the antidote to the strict feminine and structural new look of Christian Dior. It was much simpler, much easier to wear. And what I personally found really interesting is to get the chance to see this big variety of suits up close, to explore the materials. Not all of them were made of tweed, and then also to see that she used her iconic colors, the beige and the black, but in between there's this whole rainbow of colors. As I mentioned before, there were beautiful designs in pink, in purple, in green, or completely colorful suits. So this is also something that shows a very different perspective on Chanel and that she didn't shy away from colors. In a corridor you could then see the 255 bag and also the two-tone shoes, and then this corridor led through evening wear to her custom jewelry, and the exhibition ends with her last runway shows and different rather evening wear creations. When I analyzed the exhibition afterwards, it became clear to me that this last room exemplified Chanel's design language towards the end of her career. I overheard 2 ladies discussing the garments, and one said, "They are rather beautiful, but they are not really Chanel." And then I thought, yeah, they are actually right. Many of these dresses were really pretty, but if I saw them in an exhibition without telling me it was Gabrielle Chanel, I probably would not be able to tell. And this reminded me of my discussion with Madame Faction about Karl Lagerfeld, that when he took over the house in the 70s after Gabrielle Chanel's death, the brand had an old-fashioned reputation. He had to revamp the brand, modernize it, and this is something that I took home with me. It was a bit of this question mark. I would have appreciated if the curators had addressed this phase of Gabrielle Chanel's career a bit more. Now, I have talked at great length about the exhibition itself, but what do I say? Is it worth visiting? I do think it is a very good exhibition. I would recommend, if you can, go to London to see it. And here, as a side note, this is a non-sponsored video. I'm just sharing my personal experience here. The exhibition has been sold out already, so there are no tickets left anymore, but you can become a V&A member. I'm also a V&A member, and this allows you to just basically show up at the museum and visit the exhibition anytime. So there's no need to pre-book. You just show up, and what I did is I showed up very early. I would actually recommend that you show up at 10. I arrived at around 10:30, and it was still a good time to visit the exhibition, I thought, because the tickets are sold in advance. It won't get too crowded, but then I started at 10:30, and then at around noon, when I finished the exhibition, it got more crowded, more people were waiting. So if you can, visit as soon as the V&A opens at 10 in the morning. In conclusion, I would say if you have the chance to go to London, please go visit this exhibition. It's a very beautiful one. It's very well made. It's an interesting exhibition. I very much enjoyed it. I also think it's a great complement to Karl Lagerfeld, A Line of Beauty. And I'm curious about you. Have you seen this exhibition and what are your thoughts on it? Or are you planning to visit and you have some questions that I may be able to answer for you? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also head over to thepinklookbook.com for more fashion related articles, and also don't forget to check out my fashion brand Pelagona. And if you liked this video, I'm sure you will enjoy watching my video about Karl Lagerfeld. Thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.